So once again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex. I'm based in Brisbane, Queensland. I work here at Mathspace and have worked here at Mathspace for about 5 years. Prior to that, I spent about 10 years in the classroom. And this afternoon, I'm excited to be talking with you all about space practice. This is something that I'm quite passionate about, as I've sort of been working with heaps of wonderful schools as I've been in this role for the last 5 years. And I've been kind of developing this idea, and so I'm hoping that this will be really helpful to everyone that's here, and to share some ideas as a teaching community. Before we get too far into it, and I've just done a bit of an introduction, I'm going to do a poll soon, but I just wanted to, and I put a little note for myself there, obviously, that with the Zoom chat and Q&A etiquette, we will be at times using the chat as we have already for people that have been here. And again, great to see people from all over the country attending. We've got people from all over Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Darwin, I can see, all the way out to Western Australia. So we've got everyone here, which is excellent. So in terms of the chat, there'll be a couple of times that I might mention maybe sharing something in the chat, which will be a great opportunity to kind of type something in if you wish. If you do have any questions as we're going through, questions that you want answered by myself or someone else on the Mathspace team, there's actually a Q&A section. So rather than relying on putting your questions in the chat, if you could throw any sort of questions pertaining to the presentation or anything specifically about Mathspace as well into the Q&A, then we can make sure that those get answered. And my colleague Adrian is here. He's based in Sydney. He'll be on the chat and the Q&A, I'm sure. I've worked with him a little bit on some of these ideas as well as the rest of the Mathspace team that is here could jump in at any time. So that's kind of how I'm hoping that we can utilize the chat and the Q&A there. Okay, so the opening poll, there's going to be 3 questions that I ask of you, and there's a QR code that you can scan, but you probably won't need to because I'm going to launch the poll right now. So if I can find that section, it looks different now that the thing is running, different to when I practiced before. Where is the polls? Feel free to scan the thing. Oh, there we go.
Launched it for you. There you go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Great. So there's the poll. So first question is, how often do you revisit concepts after first instruction? And so it's a scale, obviously, a bit of a scale there from 1 to 10. Just put in kind of like, 10 being very often, 0 being hardly ever or not at all. And what I mean by that question essentially is after you've first introduced a concept, how often are you able to revisit it sort of on a regular basis? If you're anything like me and lots of other teachers that I've spoken with, often will be teaching a range of concepts and we don't necessarily get a chance to really revise or revisit some of those concepts until just before the exam when we have this block of revision. That's kind of quite a common thing. If you're anything like me, you might not be able to do this as much as you would maybe like. So it'll be interesting to sort of see the spread there of how much people feel that they do this at the moment. Cool. So answers are coming in, which is great. So second question, people have already started answering, and the third question as well. So they're probably pretty self-explanatory. So I might just give a few moments for everyone to answer those. And we've still got people coming in and joining this afternoon as well. The number of teachers in the session is going up. So welcome everyone that's just joined and suddenly landed on this poll out of nowhere. Hopefully you find that pretty self-explanatory as you've joined. But yeah, thank you to everybody that has answered that already. Looks like we're getting a really good sample size here, which is excellent to see. And yeah, it's so I've actually run this session a couple of times already with a smaller group within Queensland as a part of the QAMT. Some things that I've done up in both Cairns and Rockhampton, and the great QAMT branches up there. And so the sessions that I've run definitely didn't have as much of a sample size as what we have here, but it's so interesting to see how similar the results are. So we might just give that sort of 10 more seconds for anybody that's still answering those questions. And then I will end that poll. 5, 4, 3, counting slower. About 26 people that haven't had a chance yet, but that might be enough. We got 100. That's a pretty good sample size. Makes it easy to work out percentages as well. So let's end the poll right there. Okay, so I'm going to share these results so that everyone can see those. So the answers to question one, again, it's so fascinating how similar this is. So there's a few people and it's skewed towards the top end, which is excellent to see. And that's been the case before as well. So it's good to see that we're all kind of like getting there where we sort of feel like we're revisiting concepts, but ultimately it's kind of bulging in the middle. So that's pretty common. That's certainly how I would relate as well, that as a teacher, I felt like I wanted to revisit concepts more often than I did. Certainly not at the 10 level, but it's good to see some teachers are sort of up there as well. The skills gap, again, similar results to what I've seen before. It's scary that most people feel, 47% of people feel that it's worsened. Considering that we've kind of, this thing has been identified out of COVID and been talked about since then, and the fact that it's getting worse is concerning for sure. And then number 3 there, the resources that are most needed to address the gap. Now I'll just go on to my next slide. Can you see the slides that I'm presenting at the same time as the poll, or maybe not? You can? Okay.
Oh, I think I just stopped sharing it. Sorry, I'll share the results again.
Okay, cool. So I think, yeah, so if you can see the graph that's on my slides there from the Knowledge and Skills Gaps Reports 2021, this is from Oxford University Press. This is, again, old data now. This report is sort of from that sort of 2019, 2020 period. And it's fascinating to me just to see how similar these results are. Now, most people are still saying that the biggest thing that's required is differentiated learning resources. Access to primary level resources is a little bit lower in our poll compared to these results here, but the shape of the graph is very similar. So yeah, so I'm obviously very pleased that I work at a company where I feel that we offer all of these things, and differentiated learning resources is our strength for people that use Mathspace. I hope that you would attest to that. I know that a lot of the teachers that I work with say that that is a good reason to use Mathspace. But yeah, that's definitely right up there. Cool. Okay, so now I saw a hand raised before. Please feel free to type something in the chat there. We can only see question 1 and it's covering the slide. We can scroll. Okay. All right. So hopefully everyone got the kind of gist of what was going on there at this point. Okay, cool. So again, thanks so much for contributing to that. Really interesting to see those results. So why do I think this matters? Now, if you've heard of the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, even if you haven't, it's a very intuitive idea, I think. So there's this concept that we all know through the lived experience of teaching, that students forget a lot of what they've learnt. So basically, the data sort of shows students forget 70% of what they learn within 24 hours without reinforcement, which is significant. The Ebbinghaus forgetting curves comes from 1885, so very, very old research. And this guy actually did some experimentation on himself to sort of see how long he'd be able to remember things. And it was about sort of, that 7-day period or about a week, the memory sort of declined rapidly. Now, this is not sort of been left and it's not really that old. It has been replicated within the last kind of 10 years or so. So this is still a well-known phenomenon. And again, we all know as teachers that this is our lived experience. So that's obviously an issue and something that intuitively I always felt was an important piece of why it is important to revisit concepts more often than just that final revision before the exam. We know there's a skills gap, and unfortunately, most of us believe that it's actually getting worse, which is scary as well. And so I sort of put all this together, and I sort of wonder how can we balance improving fluency, but keeping the kids engaged with that, and differentiating for the wide range of abilities with that skills gap that we've got, and how do we fit all of that into the curriculum time that we have? Basically, the target or the goal of this is to try and reduce that curve, to try and extend out, and this is what spaced repetition in essence is achieving or trying to achieve, is this idea that if we do revisit concepts, then we're going to improve our retention over time. So that's kind of where I started getting interested in the idea and decided to kind of do a little bit of research from there. But I mentioned right at the start that really this whole thing started for me 5 years ago when I started working for Mathspace. And again, I'm so privileged to work with so many great teachers and schools in this role that I'm in. And one of those many great schools that I work with is actually Shaler Park State School. So they've been using Mathspace as well for 5 years. They already had something in place before they used Mathspace. And I was honored to be able to work with one of the teachers there quite closely and to co-present with him at a QAMT Early Years, Middle Years conference a few years ago. And so he presented the strategy that they were using at Shaler Park State School. And it's called Great Learning Our Way. And basically, to really quickly summarize, the concept was that they would be having multiple exposures to these concepts for the students. So there was a pre-test, explicit direct instruction lessons, a post-test, a glow or reteach, which is Great Learning Our Way, a post-glow test, and the intervention. Now that sort of seems like a pretty intuitive cycle, but the cool thing was that the pre-test, the post-test, and the post-test, if you like, was effectively the exact same set of questions. So the students were getting exposed to those same concepts multiple times. Every Friday, the students basically did 3 tests, a pre-test for the week coming, a post-test for the week that's been, and a post-post test. And that fit into this cycle really nicely. But the questions can't be exactly the same. You don't want students to just be rote learning these things. You don't want them to just memorize answers. You want them to be exposed to the same concepts. So the way that Shaler Park used this actually aligned really nicely with what Mathspace does, which is to randomize the numbers each time the students see those questions. And so that really got me thinking about, isn't that a great strategy for just making sure students are revisiting concepts on a regular basis? Just that ability to be able to pick some questions and not increase the workload of having to rewrite those, but being able to reassign them and have those numbers change is just a really nice, powerful sort of strategy. So it's something that I kind of sat on and I'm really impressed with how they were doing it. Again, they were doing this before they had Mathspace, but when they were doing it manually, they would have to spend every weekend marking 3 tests and trying to get the kids all grouped so that they could do their reteaching the following week. And that was a bit hectic. So Mathspace certainly helped in this particular case. So I'm interested to hear, because I know that whenever I go to schools and I talk about this sort of thing, there's some things that schools already do. Like there's lots of things that we do as teachers that already sort of achieve some of these things, whether you do it with Mathspace or not. I was just at a school earlier this week talking about this idea, and they were already sort of doing this approach where they had 5 questions at the start of every lesson. They weren't doing it on Mathspace. They've said that maybe they will sort of transition, but the idea was that one question was something that was, past content. One question was something that was relevant for the lesson that they were going to do, and then there were 2 questions that were basic fluency that were kind of random, and then one both focused more on reasoning. And so that was a strategy that the head of maths had picked up and was implementing through. So again, that provided that opportunity for space for practice. It was something that they were doing, but I was able to discuss that with them a little bit further. So if there's anything that people are already doing where they feel like, just me sharing those couple of examples from schools, if you feel there's something you're already doing, I'd love for you to added into the chat. If you can sort of summarize to some extent, it'd be great to hear. But yeah, it's just to sort of point out that there's so many great things going on in schools. I want to acknowledge that. And this is kind of just the stuff that led me to think about how can we really improve our implementation or come up with strategies with a resource like Mathspace or with digital tools that can help leverage that effectively. So yeah, I can't see anyone adding to the chat right now. It might be a little bit hard, I understand, to kind of explain in a nutshell what your school could be doing. But yeah, okay, great. So someone shared they do pre, mid, and post tests with essential assessments. I know that essential assessments is a platform that does really focus on that pre and post testing idea for that kind of teacher data, which is really cool. Weekly homework distributed through OneNotes. So awesome. Oka for general reviews. Great. Yeah, if people want to sort of add some things in there, it might be sort of, something that other people might find useful as well. But I'm sure there's lots of stuff that we do already. All right, but we're here to sort of learn more about space practice. So I guess my goal is to sort of give you a little bit more around that idea of how you can maybe take what you're already doing and extend it or maybe shift it. And also obviously to sort of see how can we use a tool like Mathspace to really make that super effective. So what is space practice? Basically, the concept of space practice is that students will review material over spaced intervals to strengthen memory. Okay, so it's a very, again, sort of intuitive idea, I think. And the neuroscience behind it is that we know that our brains trim stuff. Like there's that saying, if you don't use it, you lose it. So if we don't reinforce and use something regularly, I mean, there's some things like you could say it's like riding a bike, that sort of phrase, that there's some things that seem to go into our long-term memory. And so why does that happen? How do they get there? And what the science has kind of exposed is actually the length of time of the break that makes the difference. So perhaps the reason why people naturally gravitate to knowing how to ride a bike or drive a car, some of these things that we don't need to think about so much that we internalize, is because we've done these things repeatedly with the breaks in between doing those things. So the neurons are firing. That's when the sort of idea is presented. And then we switch those neurons off. And then we refire them with this period of recall, which is your brain then identifying, oh, that concept is actually important. That concept, even though we haven't done it for a little while, I can't trim that because it's come back again. And so the key there is that we're actually refiring the exact same neurons. We're doing the same skills. So I think this is a crucial thing because I think sometimes when we pick questions and we're trying to do like our quick fives and stuff like that, we're trying to pick questions from prior knowledge and questions from current. It's very easy when we're only selecting like one question from past knowledge that we might choose that question from a particular topic, but how many times have we done that exact skill, the exact set of steps that are required in that question on a repetitive basis? And so, yeah, it's the length of time in between that makes the big difference. And so getting that right is important. We know that after about 7 days, it's kind of gone completely. Now, this is different for different subjects as well. So some subjects have actually tried this idea of presenting an idea and then getting the kids outside and kicking a ball around or doing something completely different and then coming back in and redoing that idea. I don't think in maths, in the maths curriculum, the way it is, that we have enough time to necessarily take our class time and go and kick balls outside. But I think what we can do is present an idea, something fluency based, and then move into a different area of maths, a different topic, maybe an investigation, maybe something like that, and then come back to that fluency again and practice that same skill. But we've got to get that break time right. So whether that's done within a lesson, or I think for maths, actually doing it over a week period, every couple of days or something like that, is going to be where you really get the benefit of this. So basically the idea is we fire the neurons, we turn them off, we fire them again, we turn them off, we fire them again, and basically repeat. So that's kind of the idea of math, like sort of spaced retrieval versus maths practice, where we're trying to fire those neurons and then we turn them off, and ultimately our brain just trims that knowledge And so when we get to year 11 methods and we're trying to teach differentiation and the students have no idea how to do anything about fractions or index laws that they should have learned in year 9 because they crammed it and then their brains have trimmed that skill because they haven't done it again recently. So that's kind of the science behind it. So the idea that I sort of took from this was a bit of what I call a 3-tiered approach. So the first tier is that sort of exposure. I like this idea that the first opportunity students are exposed to these concepts, there should be lots of scaffolding. So that's the supportive first exposure. Now, if you know Mathspace is very well known for not only its differentiation, but its support for students. So it's very scaffolded. It has lots of hints. There's videos. We've got Milo AI. You can see the poster in the background there. So there's lots of things to kind of that you can enable to support the students in that first exposure. And the expectation that I would have there is that students should get 100%. Like they should absolutely nail it using all that support. That's kind of their opportunity to make mistakes and learn. And then I would say tier 2 is the recall. So there's some sort of gap between these two things, whether that's done later in the lesson. And I have actually had the benefit to go and run some lessons where I have actually started with a set of questions. I've moved into an investigation and then I've come back to that same set of questions at the end. And I've seen engagement and sort of active stuff. So you can work within a single lesson. Ideally, if it was my class, I'd be running this as something they do before that lesson. And then I'd be running this probably a couple of days later, something that is post-lesson. And so that's the tier 2, and this is scaffolded retrieval, but I would say less support and more effortful recall. So in this particular instance, maybe not every student would get 100%, but as a teacher, I want to see that data. I want to see where they do make those common mistakes. So I would take away some of that support. I wouldn't give them the opportunity to just try the question, over and over again until they get it right. I would want to see if they made a mistake on it. But that would be that retrieval phase. And then we have this opportunity, and this is fairly new to Mathspace, to do a gamified final challenge as well. So we've got a game in there called Tug of War, so we can actually take the exact same set of questions again. And this is not, requiring teachers to pick new tasks each time they're doing this. You could literally go, I've got 5 questions, between 5 and 10 questions maybe, that I've assigned to the students. I've reassigned it again. And I'm just doing the same skills, but with a different sort of mode of operation. So that's kind of my 3-tiered approach that I've developed and come up with and sort of implemented to some extent at different schools. The science behind it. So I wanted to do a bit of research, like what is the crux of it and what's the most important thing. Research shows very clearly that it's the spacing that has the biggest impact as far as I'm concerned here. So spacing improves retention by 200%. So I think it's really important that we consider that we are sort of exposing students to these ideas multiple times and getting that space between correct. That's kind of the key element there. We can see that retrieval, just the act of retrieval itself, boosts performance by 50%. Interestingly, gamification increases engagement by up to 40%. So I think this is important. I think it's a fun way to get the kids engaged. However, it's not the most beneficial thing. So it's something that's fairly new to Mathspace. Typically, Mathspace hasn't relied on the games. And I think the key thing there is that we need to use the gamification purposefully. I think if we just throw games at kids, we're not going to get as much improvement in the learning as if we use it meaningfully in conjunction with that spaced retrieval. I think it could be really powerful. So yeah, now there's some questions. I'll just remind you that if you do have like a question around Mathspace or what I'm presenting, please feel free to drop it into the Q&A section because that's a really good place to kind of like put any questions that you have for us as a team. If you want to engage with the rest of the teachers here, please feel free to use the chat. So that's kind of like the distinction there. But yeah, I'm sure our team will keep an eye on the chat to some extent as well. Okay. So a couple of examples of how this has worked and to different sort of levels. So there's one school that I work with. again, I work with so many great schools. They were creating weekly review tasks. So every lesson three, they didn't have their students on laptops every single lesson. I don't believe you should need to, by the way. But every third lesson of every week, they would have this kind of opportunity for students to do a review on Mathspace. And so that would be a pretty sizable number of questions from that week's worth of content. But what they told me straight up was that they always did this and the data was collected, but they never really had time to review that data or do anything meaningful with it. So I suggested, like, even if we weren't able to sort of do the full three-tiered approach, at the bare minimum, let's just like do the first tier, which you're already doing, and let's try the gamified practice and see if that makes a meaningful difference. And so we would literally just go in that third lesson of each week. They're already doing their review. Let's stop that 15 minutes early before the end of the lesson, and then let's pick questions from the previous week or just reassign the previous week's task and run that as a game for the last part of that lesson. And so students are actively retrieving and reflecting on that stuff. Now, this has all sorts of effects because now the students are getting involved in this game of tug of war as well. They actually have a little bit more meaning to the questions that they're originally doing. Like they actually find that there's value in completing those questions. And maybe even they go home and sort of practice them again because they want to do well at next week's game and things like that. So it can change the mindset of students as well. There's all sorts of things around just, improving homework etiquette and stuff with that. But yeah, that has worked. So there's better engagement, better accountability, and there's repeated exposure straight away. So that was a really simple application. And this is what our game looks like. In terms of running the game, if you do have Mathspace and you use it, you basically reassign your custom task, and then you can go in and just click Start Game at the top of that task report, and off you can go and play Tug of War. And so it will look like this, and as students answer the questions, their names come up at the bottom with points and so on. So that was one school I worked with. Another school that I worked with, the teacher was setting about 30 questions each week for this middle school's class. I noticed that most of the students, and I had the opportunity to be in there in the school with the class, and I observed that there was a lot of students that didn't seem to be super enjoying it, and it just felt like a bit overwhelming to some of them. And so I sort of mentioned to this teacher, like, 30 questions seems like a lot. Can see in the data that, not all the students are completing all the questions. And he said to me, like, I need to do 30 questions to get these three kids. Like, there's three kids in the class that are capable of doing those 30 questions, and they're able to get through them. And so I put the hard questions at the end of that set to make sure that those students are met, like their needs are met. And I said, that's great for those three kids. I totally understand that. However, the rest of the kids I could sort of see were losing interest, and it gets to the point where they go, like, their mental mindset is that these questions aren't even for me, like I'm not expected to complete them, and so it's just sort of going downhill in terms of what they're actually doing. So my suggestion was that rather than doing 30 questions, let's kind of really chunk it down and just do maybe 10 questions, whatever it is that every single student is going to have success in. Again, I think that first exposure, for me, the idea is that every student gets 100%. So we need to make it manageable for every student. Now, there's going to be some students that finish that super quickly. Those three kids that were able to do the 30 questions and that are enjoying that, we don't want to diminish what value they have as well. And we want to make sure we're meeting their needs. So that creates another issue, which I'm going to loop back to in this section. So the differentiation and scope challenge. How do we support those low ability students without boring the high ability ones? So I thought about this as well, and the reason that I suggested cutting down and just doing this sort of small number of questions for the whole group that everyone in the group could engage with and have success with is that I think it comes back to this idea that I learnt way earlier, probably 8 years ago, when I was teaching. And I remember this PD very clearly. It was all about knowing your students, knowing your targets, and varying the pathways. This was drummed into us. It was something that was really big at the school I was working at. And it stuck with me. And I thought, how does this apply in this particular context? So obviously we can use data. We already know there's 3 students in the class that are more than capable of doing it. We know the targets, and I think this is important in terms of setting that standard for the whole class. What is the standard we expect everyone to reach? But then how do we vary the pathways? How do we make sure that those top students are still extended? So we already talked about how we've got our 3-tiered approach, but I think there's an opportunity as well to sort of slightly reframe it, that we've got a scaffolded tier, an adapt tier, and then an extend tier. So what do I mean by that? The Mathspace edge for me is the fact that the adaptive tasks are built into the textbook. And so for those top students, in my experience, the top students are very capable of self-directing. So we can actually extend them by using our mastery reports to identify which areas are students having success in across the textbook, and we can actually push them to go and do extra work in those areas. So like this is an example of the Mathspace textbook. On the student side, students actually have access to their progress across every single topic. So if we are just setting questions that every single student in the classroom can have success in, and we are building that capacity for students to engage in the work that we're setting as teachers and making sure there's success there, our top students that finish that work super quick, that are looking for those extra questions, we can say, great, like I already know that you were going to finish that quick. I want you to go into your textbook, 1.03. I've noticed that you haven't got a star for that yet. Like, why don't you get your star for 1.03 or 1.05? And with that prompting, over time, these students and a lot of the very top high-end students will do this automatically, even without teacher prompting, I've found in my experience. But you can get your students actually starting to self-evaluate, self-regulate, and go in and look for that work. And so the goal is that students will master every single topic. Not every single student will master every single topic, because there will be some lower end students. They're going to have success with the tasks that we've set, that are small, that are chunked, and they may not reach the top level in the textbook. We can hopefully guide them towards that over time, but we want to make sure they're feeling success in the tasks we set, while the top students are still getting stretched by that self-directed work. So that's something that I think is a really important, crucial part of how do we make sure we're doing this spaced retention at a particular standard, knowing the target for the whole class, but still allowing for students to extend beyond that by varying the pathways. So yeah, I'm hoping this is all making sense. It's very uncommon for me to be talking this long without getting some feedback from the rest of the room, but this is the nature of a Zoom session. But I'm keeping a little eye on the chat as well, and hoping that people are finding this useful so far. Okay, so I've kind of already talked about this on that little image, but just to blow it up a little bit further, this is, like I was saying, this is the student textbook. So students can track their mastery, they can see their mastery level, and they can go in and start an adaptive task at any time. As a teacher, I can also assign adaptive tasks. I can do that straight from the mastery report. So if I've got students that are very smart, but a little bit less independent or motivated at that time, maybe for a younger year level group, they may be less capable of doing that themselves. I can go in as a teacher, I can go to that mastery report, and I can click on those topics and just assign them to those students if I need to. But I do think if we assign too many tasks, that tends to just become overwhelming as well. So I'm a big believer in, as a teacher, trying to assign the tasks that are going to be most value to the students, in terms of this is the minimum expectation, and I need everyone to rise to this occasion, meanwhile hoping to promote students that are capable to go and do that extra work. But like I said, as a teacher, I can go in and assign individual adaptive tasks to any student, and students can also go in and do that work themselves by starting an adaptive task. As they're doing their questions, if you're not super familiar with Mathspace, I talked about the level of scaffolding and support that students have access to. So we do have, and this is a slightly outdated, I didn't have time to update this. We actually have prettier buttons now than what we had then, but the questions are the same. So the principle is that as students are doing it, they can put in each step, they can ask for hints, they've got access to videos, they've got access to worked examples, and the hints are going to be quite detailed. And obviously going forward, like this is what the video would look like. The numbers are going to be different for that. They're getting feedback on how they're going on individual steps. So whether the step is an expected step in the progress, whether it's not. And so all of this level of support is what they've got access to in that first exposure. They've got access to the lesson as well. And then, with additional hints, what did I do wrong in this step? They can get a lot of detailed feedback on that specific part of the step as well, with some of the Milo AI stuff, which is only getting better and better. So there's a lot of support. There's even support in communication. So when students put in the right answer, but they don't have the right notation, it's going to give them some support and guidance to get the right answer. This used to be a key area of frustration if you've ever used any online maths resource ever. I'm sure everyone's familiar with that idea that students put in the right answer, but it's not accepting their response. This is something that Mathspace has worked very hard on as well, to make sure that when students are doing that first exposure, they've got that support, that it's not just supporting them in the steps they're doing, but in their communication as well, and identifying, oh, you've got the right answer, you just need to write it a particular way. So that's all there as well, which is great. And then as a part of that support, so I've shown you kind of examples of the student support that I think students should have access to, but then I think the retries is crucial. Now, this has just recently been redesigned. I got the latest version of this into these slides because I think it's really important. They've redesigned this task sort of steps here in terms of creating a task to make this more prominent, which I think is great. This used to be kind of hidden in the advanced options, but I think it's crucial that we get this right. So again, I'm advocating that in that first exposure students have to these questions, I would leave it as is. So they've got all that support. They've got the ability to access hints, videos, examples, and they can retry as much as they need. And I'm setting that expectation as a teacher that every student should get 100% of these questions. I'm choosing the right number of questions, 11 questions, approximately 10 minutes. I can kind of use this as a bit of a guide. I've got a bit of an indication at the top here of what sort of level of difficulty I'm covering. I've jumped from easy to a couple of hard ones there. Maybe I should have gone a little bit more medium instead, but you can use that sort of feedback to sort of choose your questions meaningfully. And yeah, again, every student should be getting 100% on this first set of questions. If they make a mistake, they're using the retries. But the second time that they do this, I would be at least turning the retries off. I'd just be toggling that button off when I go to reassign it, so they don't have that ability to retry. So when they make a mistake, that data is really clear to me. I can see, oh, is this a common mistake? Is everyone in the class making a mistake on that question or not? If they've done really, really well in that first exposure and they're doing well in class, maybe I'd turn off these hints as well. So I'd at least turn off the retries, maybe turn off the student support, some combination thereof. You can see the question variations as well. Obviously, I'd leave that probably as is. If you do turn that off, it will choose a particular random set of numbers for that task. So if you wanted to print it, for example, you could turn off the question variation and you're going to get one set that you can print out. Every student's going to get the same numbers, but it will lock into one of the random sets of numbers. So you still get a different set of numbers each time you set the task, which is handy. When they're doing the retries, and this is something that needs to be visible for teachers, I think, when they make a mistake. So if they've gone in, they've put in the wrong answer. I mucked around with this. I made a very common mistake and did 6/6, which is what a lot of students would probably do. Obviously, they've used the support there. And then because they made that mistake, they got the right answer eventually. But because I made a mistake at some point, I've got this try again option. And so that's where students can click that. It gives them a new set of numbers for that same question. So they're still doing that same skill and giving them the opportunity to have another go and again, get that 100% out. So I think the retries are really important for that first exposure. Okay, just gonna take a breath there and hopefully everything's all good and there's no other kind of questions coming through. Yeah, so the next part of this is thinking about that pre and post testing. So people mentioned at the start, essential assessment has the pre-testing and the post-testing and that sort of thing. So it got me thinking again, what does pre and post testing look like? And what are we doing when we're pre and post testing? So I've kind of presented a concept that is basically pre and post testing. I've presented this idea that they're doing a set of questions in this first exposure. Again, if it was my class, I would be assigning that to do before the lesson. I'd hopefully get some of the low-level fluency stuff. Like if I was teaching 11 methods right now, I'd be assigning those year 9 index laws and fractions questions to do before the class. That would be an approach I would take. With the repeated exposure, I might remove some of those easy questions and add some hard ones, so it's a bit more of a spiraling thing, but I would absolutely be doing that. So that's effectively pre and post testing to some extent. It's doing a task before and after the learning. But is that assessment for learning or is it assessment of learning? And I think that the approach that I'm sort of suggesting here is definitely more of that assessment for learning piece, because they've got that support. I'm actually, if I'm giving them access to the retries and the hints, I'm actually not using that data to indicate to me where there's any problems necessarily, because if they've used the retries as I expect them to, I want them all to get 100%. Now I can look through and I can see when students have used the retries and I can identify, oh, they've obviously made mistakes and then fixed it. But I'm more interested in the fact that they fixed it than the fact that they made the mistakes. So we've kind of got this, when we're using that Mathspace platform, we've got the videos, we've got the hints, and we've got the retries. That's, I think, assessment for learning. So what's assessment of learning look like? That's a bit different, I think. So that's kind of where, and I think this is more what essential assessment kind of does. Correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think that's that idea that we need to, as teachers, have some data and some idea of what students kind of know beforehand and what students know afterwards, and we want to assess their knowledge. We want to assess what they've learnt, and we want to be able to identify growth as well. So that's where I think growth check-ins come in, and this is another part of the Mathspace ecosystem, and I think that they're distinct and both equally important. In this experience, students aren't going to get the hints and the videos and the support. They just asked a question. In the way that we do it, we actually don't even give them any immediate feedback on whether they got those questions right or wrong. We actually sort of tell them at the end which skills have they demonstrated. So that's I think a different purpose. And again, I think both are equally important. So this is what it's going to look like in terms of our pre and post check-ins. And again, I think this is more that idea of assessment of learning. So the assessment for learning is more for the student, and the assessment of learning, I think, is actually more for the teacher. And great for reporting, great for communicating with parents, and great for encouraging students as well. So we want to sort of be able to see what is their difference in their grade level over a particular period of time. What different skills have they learnt in terms of the curriculum outcomes? How have they changed in their knowledge of those different outcomes, and so on. So this is data we can also get in Mathspace by using the growth check-ins. And we're currently developing for people that are using Mathspace right now. I think this is going to be really exciting later this year. At the start of every chapter in the textbook, there'll be a pre-test, which is using the check-in questions that teachers can assign. And at the end of each chapter, there'll be a post-test, which is, again, using those check-in questions. So we're developing that now. We're kind of in beta trials with some schools. And that's, I think, equally as important, again, but more for the teacher's benefit, potentially, than the student's benefit. Obviously, giving the student that data so that they can navigate and identify their own gaps is another bonus, which we also do. But I think that there's a couple of different things going on there that is worth thinking about. All right. Again, I work with a massive range of schools, so privileged to work with. There was a school that I visited last term where they actually sort of were talking to me about what's the best practice for using something like Mathspace. Now, I don't believe that this is a one-size-fits-all. I created a document, a Mathspace implementation policy document for that school in sort of consultation. It was a very quick consultation. Definitely requires some more follow-up and things like that as well. But I wanted to share because I know that a lot of schools are looking for this. A lot of schools, we've got lots of tools, we've got lots of resources. There's so many different options we can choose as teachers. But what's the best way to use them is kind of the question that comes up all the time. So basically, everyone on the team here is very keen to partner with the schools that we work with and very much on board with this idea of helping you develop what's the best approach for your school. So everything I've presented here is kind of, I think, one approach that works really well. I think you could do it with almost any resource. I think Mathspace is very well placed to be a great resource to do space practice because of the way the numbers change and the way you're able to reassign tasks and play the game and all that sort of stuff. But if you do want a Mathspace implementation policy, I can share this one, which again may not be specific to your school, but I'm happy to share it as a resource, as a starting point if you're interested in this kind of stuff. I can drop a link to that possibly in the chat if I can chat to the whole group at the end of the session. But yeah, that's something that I think should be developed with each school in partnership with the resource you're using. So please do let us know what you need and we will help you with that. So as a part of the takeaway toolkit, like I said, I'll happy to share a Google Drive link to a folder that just has that example Mathspace implementation policy. I've got a space learning article in there, the OUP report experts, not a lot of stuff, a copy of these slides. So I'll share that with anyone that wants it. I would like everyone to sort of, hopefully, if you've gotten something out of this session, it's worth, I think, creating a 3-tiered question sequence for your next topic. This is something you could try for next week even, potentially. My advice in everything that I've seen and everything that I've kind of done in terms of implementing this so far, I think it's really important to keep it bite-sized. Again, we don't want to do a crazy number of questions. We want it to be very accessible for every student. So bite-sized, scaffolded, and consistent, and being able to sort of repeat. Again, thinking about how much space there is between those exposures as a crucial element. So that's something that I hope everyone's able to take away from this session, kind of the goal of the session. And some final thoughts. I've talked a lot about fluency throughout this whole session. I mean, everything that I've kind of talked about is more focused on fluency. I think investigations are equally as important and very important. I think the education pendulum kind of swings one way or the other constantly. So for me, fluency is not everything, but it's definitely, to me, the gateway to rich tasks. If we don't have that basic fluency, if we don't have those skills that are foundational, that are kind of really rooted for the students, then we're not going to be able to meaningfully engage with investigations and higher order thinking tasks. I think rich tasks that have low floor, high ceilings are awesome for involving all the students, but balancing that out is really crucial. So for me, simple, structured, strategic, that's long-term success. And just a little quote to put up on your wall, I guess, in the classroom is that practice doesn't make perfect, but practice makes permanent. And yeah, practice makes progress as well. Thanks, Tracy. So lots of good things that we can take out of that. So yeah, a bit of Q&A and networking opportunities. We've still got kind of 10 minutes or so if people are keen to hang around. I'm really keen to hear from everybody what stood out and what could work at your school. And I will just grab the link that I was talking about and I will put that in the chat. I'll just work out how to do that now. But yeah, that's kind of the end of my session. So I hope that that's been really helpful for everyone. Let's go here. This is the folder that I was talking about sharing. And I should be able to share. Let me just check that it's a public link. People with access can open the link. I will try this right now and let's see if it's accessible. Great to hear the 3-tier structure was a standout. Thank you so much for letting us know, Loris. If someone wants to try that link and just let me know if there's any issues with it. Not accessible. Okie joke. Maybe I can, there we go. Can you try again? That should work now. Sweet. Great. Okay, like I said, there's not a lot in that folder. But yeah, hopefully the implementation strategy is useful as a template. The copy of the slides here, which hopefully you can all access as well if they're, yeah, anyone with the link can access that. So that should be fine. And then there's a couple of little articles that might be useful. All right, were there any Q&A?
Yeah, Anastasia's just put in a nice question there, saying one of the biggest issues at our school is the curriculum is so full for year 7, trying to cover everything with all the interruptions we get. It feels like a losing battle. So I wonder if we could suggest some strategies for sort of feeling like you're progressing through the content while also giving these opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, Anastasia, that's where using a resource like Mathspace is actually really important. Any sort of digital tool that's going to be effective, an effective part of the learning ecosystem, because I think going back to the basic three-tiered approach kind of idea up here. Um, I think a lot of this, the gamified bit is definitely an in-class activity, an end of lesson or something like that. But this first tier and second tier ideally is done outside of that classroom time. So being able to uh, transfer some of that, it's like a flipped learning approach in one sense that you're assigning tasks and the students can watch the videos if they need help and they can do all of that learning outside of the classroom. During class time, I'm there as a teacher. I'd be doing a lot of worksheet tasks. I'd be still getting kids to do pen and paper a lot of the time, potentially. But outside of that classroom, they've got that resource that kind of gives them that support. And so getting them to do that, I think, before the lesson can unlock a lot more of our curriculum time. Again, thinking about that 11 methods example, or even if we were doing, year 10 algebraic fractions for a pre-methods group or something like that. And we're wanting to make sure that they can just make the denominators the same. Like that's year 6, year 7 level fractions questions. I could create a quick task that has some of that basic stuff, get them to do that before the lesson, and then during the lesson time, progress up. That's something that's on my mind, something that I've sort of thought about in terms of tackling that issue of not having a lot of curriculum time. Like, how do we transfer some of that time outside of the classroom? But I know in a lot of the schools I work with, some schools, have great homework programs that the kids are, doing lots of homework and they're happy to do that. Some schools, not so much. So how do we get the kids engaged in doing that? Again, I think the Tug of War game can help because we could, this is a cruel idea, but something that I've shared with some schools because I'm a cruel person. I would put all the kids that did their homework in one team and all the kids that didn't do their homework in the other team and let them battle it out. And the team that didn't do their homework would absolutely get smashed. That's kind of one way to maybe try and get kids thinking about, if I put that bit of time in outside of the classroom, that's going to help. So there's different school contexts, different things going on. But yeah, that's definitely a part of my thinking around that. Um, yeah, so okay, cool. So there's a chat message from Edward. Daniel, my colleague, just let me know. Limited access to ICT resources, making full use of Mathspace. Absolutely. I work with a few schools that are very similar to that as well. So a school that I work with out west, actually in Queensland, in central Queensland, they're similar sort of boat. They don't have a lot of laptop access. And it's funny, I caught up with the head of maths. I don't know if anyone from Emerald State High is on here at the moment, but caught up with the head of maths recently, and he mentioned because they're kind of trying to implement some laptops, but they don't have a lot of it. The kids didn't work very well on laptops. There's too many distractions for them and so on. So we came up with a strategy of using these maths-based tasks, turning off the questions are different for every student so that we can print it. And that way you're able to actually print out a custom task. Again, keeping it chunked like a small number of questions, but printing that out multiple times. So you're still getting the first exposure, second exposure. It's not as supportive if they don't have the online access with the hints. Obviously, that's a bit more ideal, but you can still provide that access to those questions and have those numbers change. And then when you do have the opportunity to do something online, you can reassign that exact same task again that you've printed a couple of times and get them engaging with it online. But it's the same questions, it's the same, working out, the same sort of stuff they're doing, the same skills, same notation. It's just going to correct them. And so playing the game after they've kind of done a couple of worksheets with that same set of questions can still be valuable. So even if you're only getting on those devices once a fortnight, even once a month, you can still make use of that time when you are, and it's meaningful. It's not just a waste of digital time. It's kind of building off of stuff that they've done offline as well. So I don't know if that helps, Edward, if that helps your context or as an idea, but that's certainly something I've been working with some of my schools on too.
Alex, could you also just give a quick demo of how to access that Tug of War game that came up?
Absolutely, yes. All right, so let's say we're in here. By the way, that was a little example of the pre-test thing that is coming that I spoke about. But let's see if I have a task assigned in here in the last 30 days or 7 days. If not, I might need to quickly create one. I do have a task. Isn't that excellent? Okay, so I go through the process of assigning a custom task. And then once you've assigned that custom task, as long as it's a custom task and it's currently active, you should have access to this button here. It doesn't work if you've assigned a task across like multiple classes, so it's only for one class. If you do work at a school where people are assigning tasks across, the whole year level or something like that, you could just go reassign and assign it to just your class. And once you've done that, you should be able to hit that Start Tug of War button on the custom task. It'll allow you to switch up the teams if you need to, so you can take people out of the teams, move people from one team to the other, and so on. And then choose the time at the bottom, hit continue. And here we go. Once you get to this screen, this is when I would alert the students to the fact that they're about to play a game. Maybe you even put the word game or tug of war in the task name or something like that. If students have done this task or done some work on this task prior to you pressing that start button, they actually lose out a little bit. They don't get points in the game for questions that they've completed prior to the game starting. So when I do this with teachers, I'm always saying, don't start yet, don't start yet. There's always one. There's always someone that starts putting the answers in before I've hit that start button. So students can basically have their answers ready to go, but they're not going to hit enter until you hit start. And then once that sort of counts down, off they go, and the students are entering their answers and their names are popping up and they're getting points, and it's a team-based activity. So again, it's quite fun, quite engaging way of redoing those questions again. Yeah, so Brad has mentioned printing the Mathspace tasks, the formatting can be untidy. I do agree that's something that's been worked on. So it should be improved, or it has improved, possibly since the last time you tried it. So if we were to go to print a task, I don't know what questions I chose in this task or what they will look like. I've only chosen 2. So that's not a big deal. That page break worked out just fine. If you do choose questions that have images or big multi-choice type questions, there's a greater chance that the page breaks won't work perfectly, but they have been working on improving this functionality. So you'll notice sometimes that there is a question that's put onto the next page. It can't always work perfectly. Like some of the questions, the images or something like that is too big, and so it has to end up cutting somewhere. But you should find it's improved to what it used to be. It's hard to get it 100% right. What I sometimes do is just go into the scale and then fiddle with that. Now, if you've got like a task that's 30 questions long, it's going to be very, very hard to, you'll get one page break right because you'll fiddle with the scale, and one page break is good, but then the next one's not. So again, I think that adds validity to my idea, which is not purely based on printing, but the concept that I think these should be chunked. So, a relatively small number of questions, something that's manageable, maybe 10 questions, you should be able to find the page breaks work reasonably well. And with a little bit of fiddling with the scale, I reckon 9 times out of 10, you'll get it pretty good. It shouldn't take a lot of effort. So yeah, it's definitely something that should be improved, Brad, if you want to try that again. I'm not sure the last time that you tried it, but that's something worth doing. And then I'm seeing someone, Sarah, saying, can you please add the chapter title when printing? So something that's saying where the questions come from. Now with a custom task like what I've done here, which is what I advocate using in these sorts of activities as well, those questions could come from multiple areas. So these two questions aren't necessarily from the same subchapter. So you kind of almost need a heading for each question if you were to go down that route. So that's an interesting one. Probably the best approach is just to sort of name the task yourself, whatever's kind of relevant there. I will say as well, I think I'm allowed to say this, that there's some very exciting stuff coming with printing. So watch this space. There's going to be some more sort of customizable printable worksheets that are currently in the pipe. So yeah, if printing's something that you rely on, that's definitely something that we've got in mind and will be getting improved too. So hopefully that will help down the line. All right. Thanks everyone for hanging around. Yeah, it's a pleasure to connect with everyone that's online at the moment. And yeah, absolute pleasure. If you've got any further questions, please feel free to reach out to anyone on the team and we'd be happy to help you.